waren wir ganz alleine am Berghof. Das war für mich diese Totenstille in der Früh.
She entered through heavily guarded gates at just 19, unaware her new employer was Adolf Hitler himself. For nearly 80 years, Elisabeth Kalhammer stayed silent about what she witnessed inside the Berghof. But now, with time running out, she has finally spoken.
Man kann nicht so ein Land so ein Ding führen.
Vanishing servants, secret tunnels, and chilling whispers behind closed doors. It's more disturbing than any textbook. Before her death, she said, "I must tell the truth." And now, the world finally hears it from Hitler's own housemaid.
Dann bin ich so auch bei der Tür gestanden, im Hitler, sein Schlafzimmer. Ich weiß das alles nur so genau.
Secret Life of Hitler's Maid. At the start of the 1940s, Elisabeth Kalhammer saw a job ad in the newspaper. It was for a maid position at a large house called the Berghof in the Obersalzberg Mountains. She applied without knowing that the job was for Adolf Hitler's private home. Her mother begged her not to go. But Elisabeth was young and felt she couldn't say no. Even the employment office told her she should be thankful for the opportunity. Within days, Elisabeth arrived at the Berghof after passing through tight security and armed guards. At first, it seemed like just a grand mountain house with stunning views of the Alps. But she soon realized it was far more than that. This wasn't just a retreat, it was where terrifying decisions were made. From the invasion of countries to brutal war plans, the world was being reshaped in secret rooms, just steps from where she polished silverware and served tea. Elisabeth wasn't an ordinary maid. She was working in one of the most secretive and dangerous places in Nazi Germany. The halls were quiet, but filled with fear. Staff members were warned, speak of nothing or disappear. Some vanished overnight. Others said, "You're allowed to think, but not speak." Elisabeth was even told never to look Hitler in the eye. Life at the Berghof looked calm on the surface. The rooms were filled with expensive furniture and stolen art. But underneath it all was a cold, fearful silence. Hitler didn't have to speak to change the atmosphere. People felt his anger without him even walking into the room. Elisabeth admitted years later that she felt sick to her stomach the day she arrived, and that feeling never went away. Still, she stayed quiet for most of her life. People might ask, why didn't she just leave? But she was just a teenager, alone and scared, and she feared what would happen to her or her family if she tried. Even though she didn't speak out at the time, Elisabeth never forgot what she saw and felt. Her silence was a survival strategy, not a sign of agreement. And her story reminds us that sometimes, being a quiet witness in the middle of history takes just as much bravery as speaking out. Private mountain home. The Berghof, Adolf Hitler's private home in the Bavarian Alps, didn't start off as a grand estate. It began as a small holiday house called Haus Wachenfeld, built around 1916 by a businessman named Otto Winter. Years later, in 1928, Hitler rented the home from Winter's widow and moved in with his half-sister Angela, who briefly worked as the housekeeper. At that time, the house was just a cozy mountain retreat, but things would soon change. By 1933, after Hitler rose to power, he used money earned from his book Mein Kampf to buy the house. Soon after, he had it expanded and remodeled with the help of architect Alois Degano and his aide Martin Bormann. The home was renamed the Berghof, meaning mountain court, and it became one of Hitler's favorite places. The house was designed to feel both impressive and comfortable. It had a large terrace with bright umbrellas, fancy pine paneling in the dining room, and a study with its own phone room. A giant window in the main hall could slide down into the wall, offering stunning mountain views. Hitler's study also had a hidden projector booth, where films, including Mickey Mouse cartoons, were shown in the evenings. Many visitors were surprised by how stylish the place looked. There were cactus plants in fancy pots, antique furniture, and even canaries singing in cages around the rooms. The guest rooms had old German artwork and some of Hitler's own watercolor paintings. He and Eva Braun, his longtime companion, had separate bedrooms connected by doors, and they usually ended the day together, drinking tea in his study. Even though Hitler didn't smoke, guests could do so on the terrace. He followed a vegetarian diet, with food grown in nearby gardens and a greenhouse. The house was run like a resort, with cooks, housekeepers, and gardeners keeping everything perfect. But life at the Berghof wasn't all peaceful. To build this private retreat and homes for other top Nazi leaders, local families were forced to sell their land and move. Security was extremely tight. Armed guards, SS patrols, and anti-aircraft guns protected the area. There were even machines to create smoke clouds and hide the house from enemy planes. A nearby hotel was turned into housing for Hitler's personal security team. Hitler rarely visited the Kehlstein house, a fancy mountaintop building nearby which some called the Eagle's Nest. Instead, the Berghof remained his main getaway. During the 1930s, it became a place that Nazi propaganda used to show a softer side of Hitler, playing with dogs, drinking tea, and enjoying mountain views. But behind the beautiful scenery and quiet moments, it was also the hidden heart of a terrible regime. Inside Hitler's hidden home, the Burghoff Estate looked like something from a postcard. Snowy mountaintops above, green valleys below, it seemed like the perfect place for a teenager to work. But for Elisabeth Kalhammer, it became a place full of fear and silence. At first, Elisabeth thought she had landed a normal job. But very quickly, she saw that this beautiful house was not what it seemed. The Berghof wasn't just a home. It was where Adolf Hitler and his top men met to plan war and make decisions that would affect millions. Everything inside the estate followed strict rules. Elisabeth was told not to ask questions, not to look around too much, and most importantly, never speak about what you see. Guards watched every move. Doors to important rooms stayed shut. Important Nazi leaders like Himmler and Goering came and went, each visit bringing more tension. Elisabeth and the other maids were scared. People who worked there would sometimes disappear overnight. No one ever explained why. Their names were never mentioned again. It was like they had never been there at all. Even simple mistakes had consequences. Elisabeth once lost her days off just because of a broken cup. Meals had to be made a certain way, vegetarian, carefully prepared, and always tasted first for safety. Hitler feared being poisoned or betrayed. Even his water had to be lukewarm. The fear didn't just come from Hitler himself. It came from the feeling that anyone could be punished for anything at any time. People stopped talking when someone higher ranked entered the room. Staff whispered warnings to each other and kept their heads down. The Berghof may have looked peaceful from the outside, but inside it was a prison built on control and fear. Everything was staged to keep Hitler's sense of order alive, from the arrival of officials to how dinner was served. For Elisabeth, it was a life of quiet watching. But she saw Hitler not as the world saw him on newsreels, but up close, behind the scenes. Real Hitler. Elisabeth Kalhammer never spoke directly to Adolf Hitler. None of the maids did, unless they had served him for years. But Elisabeth didn't need to speak with him to understand what kind of person he was. She saw it all with her eyes. She listened, she paid attention, and slowly, the image the world had of Hitler, a strong, calm leader, fell apart right in front of her. From the moment she stepped into the Berghof, Elisabeth realized that Hitler's mood controlled everything. Some days he would quietly walk by, nodding politely, acting almost gentle. But the next moment, he would explode in anger over something small, like a napkin folded the wrong way. The staff often said they could feel when he was nearby, like the air changed before he even entered a room. Hitler followed a strict vegetarian diet, saying it was because of health problems, especially with his spleen. Meals were carefully prepared and watched closely. Every dish had to be tasted first by women chosen just for that purpose, food tasters. But even with all these rules, Elisabeth noticed something odd. Hitler had a sweet tooth. Late at night, he would sneak into the kitchen for a special apple nut dessert known as Führer cake. It was like a child looking for a treat. Behind his diet and rules, Elisabeth saw someone who needed to control everything, even his own body. His doctor, Dr. Theodor Morell, gave him a shocking number of medications every day. Over 70 different substances, from calming pills to eye drops, some even containing strong chemicals. These drugs didn't help. In fact, they made things worse. His hands shook. His thoughts were all over the place. His angry outbursts became more frequent. His daily life followed a very tight routine. He often slept late and didn't get out of bed until the afternoon. Mornings were filled with meetings that ran like military drills. In the afternoons, he would spend hours reviewing speeches and films. Evenings were like a show, music, movies, and carefully planned social events. But even with all this, he never relaxed. He was always suspicious. He believed spies were everywhere, and he wouldn't read anything that hadn't been checked first by his closest team. If a guest said something that sounded like criticism, they were never invited back, sometimes never seen again. Elisabeth and the other staff learned to be invisible. They moved quietly, stayed out of the way, and never ever brought attention to themselves. Their job wasn't just cleaning or cooking, it was keeping calm in a place ruled by fear. She saw a man falling apart, someone who needed pills to get through the day, someone who gave dangerous orders in whispers, then wandered into the kitchen like a hungry child. Shadow of Berghof. To the outside world, Eva Braun barely existed. She was hardly seen in public, never mentioned in Nazi communications, and completely missing from Hitler's official image. But inside the walls of Berghof, things looked very different. Former maid Elisabeth Kalhammer remembered a woman who was always present, always watching, and far more involved than most realized. Eva wasn't just Hitler's companion. She acted like the lady of the house. She ran the household, designed uniforms for the maids, chose which rooms were cleaned, and even handed out Christmas gifts. She seemed kind on the surface, often chatting with the younger staff and asking about their families. But Kalhammer knew this friendliness came with a purpose. Eva listened, noticed everything, and anything said to her could end up reaching Hitler. She had power, not formal but real, and used it carefully. When Hitler lost his temper, Eva didn't protect the staff. Instead, she calmed him down, guiding his rage like someone used to handling danger. Kalhammer always remained polite to her, but deep down she was scared. Eva chose to be there. She lived in comfort, wore silk dresses and fancy jewelry, some of it likely taken from victims of the Holocaust. She attended meetings, heard Nazi leaders talk about war and killing, and said nothing. Kalhammer stayed silent for decades after the war. As a teenager, she was warned never to speak about life at Berghof. Staff who talked too much simply disappeared. Even though she never supported the Nazis or knew the full truth during the war, the shame of working in Hitler's home stayed with her. She avoided interviews and said, "I was just a maid." Esteemed guests. Over the years, many famous figures visited the Berghof. British leader David Lloyd George arrived in 1936. A year later, the Aga Khan came, followed closely by the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Even Austrian Chancellor Kurt von Schuschnigg and British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain came to meet Hitler there. Mussolini, the Italian dictator, visited in 1941. These visits weren't just friendly meetups. They were part of the political games being played behind the scenes. One very tense moment happened in May 1941, when Karl-Heinz Pinch brought a letter from Rudolf Hess. Hess had flown to Scotland without permission, hoping to make peace with Britain. Hitler was shocked and angry. That letter arrived at the Berghof. But Berghof wasn't always serious. It also had a strange kind of charm. Hitler's close circle included Eva Braun, her sister Gretel, and a few close friends like Herta Schneider. They often brought their children, and they all spent time together in what looked like a normal holiday home. Every year on Hitler's birthday, they took a big group photo with smiling faces, showing what appeared to be an ordinary family gathering, only it wasn't. Behind the scenes were the wives and children of Nazi leaders, along with Hitler's personal staff. The place felt relaxed at times, with quiet walks, shared meals, and conversations on the terrace. But it was all very controlled. Only trusted people were allowed. and everything was watched closely. Eva Braun loved filming these moments. She used a color camera to capture life at the Berghof, showing Hitler walking with friends, relaxing in the sun, or playing with dogs. These silent home movies survived the war. In 2006, experts used special software to read lips from the old footage. They found conversations that included some of Hitler's top men, Goebbels, Himmler, Heydrich, Ribbentrop, and others, all enjoying time together on the mountain. But all of it came to an end in July 1944. Hitler left the Berghof for his military headquarters in East Prussia and never came back. End of the Berghof. By April 1945, the war was almost over, and so was the story of the Berghof. Hundreds of British planes, including the famous Dambusters Squadron, flew over the Obersalzberg Mountains and dropped bombs on Hitler's mountain retreat. The Berghof was hit directly, and the damage was severe. The building, once a symbol of power and luxury, was left broken and smoking. Retreating SS troops set the house on fire. They didn't want the Allies to take it, but by then it was too late. The American 3rd Infantry Division and the French 2nd Armored Division were already approaching the area. Although the Americans had only just entered Berchtesgaden, French troops quickly pushed ahead toward the Berghof. Two French soldiers, Captain Laurent Touilleras and Brigadier François Borg, reached the Berghof first. In their jeep, they passed larger vehicles struggling up the steep hill. What they found was shocking. The house was still burning, but the underground tunnels and bunkers nearby were packed with surprises, looted art from all over Europe, thousands of bottles of wine, piles of food, and even strange items like a personal collection of women's undergarments gathered by Hermann Göring. Over the next few days, Allied soldiers entered the ruins and looted what was left. American soldiers took everything from wine to artwork, including one very famous item, Hitler's large globe, often seen in old news footage. This globe, officially called the Columbus Globe for state and industry leaders, became one of the most famous war trophies taken from the Berghof. As for the Berghof itself, the damaged shell of the house stayed on the hill for several years. But in 1952, the Bavarian government blew it up completely. Along with it, they destroyed the homes of other top Nazi leaders like Göring and Bormann, the SS barracks, and more than 50 other buildings. The goal was clear: erase the place and its dark history. Secrets revealed. When Elisabeth Kalhammer finally spoke, her story surprised even the experts. Historians who thought they knew everything about Hitler's inner circle found themselves learning something new. Elisabeth hadn't just confirmed old stories, she added details that had been missing for decades. Her quiet time as a maid at Berghof gave her a rare view into a world built on fear, control, and silence. One of her most powerful memories came from a night when she overheard Hitler, Joseph Goebbels, and Heinrich Himmler arguing. She couldn't make out every word, but the tone was clear: panic and anger. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the meeting, but voices carried through the walls. Only years later did she realize they were likely talking about problems in the camps and how to carry out their horrible plans faster. That moment placed her just steps away from decisions that changed history. Elisabeth also shared how strict life inside Berghof was. Even small mistakes like breaking a teacup could bring serious trouble. Hitler demanded full control, and everyone followed strict routines. Fear ruled everything. She saw the staff disappear and no one dared to ask why. But even with all the fear, Elisabeth admitted something shocking. As a young girl, she had once felt proud to be there. She didn't understand what was really happening. Her honesty shows how easily ordinary people could be pulled into the Nazi system without fully realizing the truth. But there are more secrets. Chilling secrets. One night in 1944, a set of military plans vanished from Hitler's private study. Chaos followed. Guards shouted, staff were questioned. Elisabeth overheard them blaming a young servant for the mistake. The next day, he was gone, vanished. Some whispered he had tried to hide the plans on purpose, maybe as a small act of resistance. But there was no proof. Hitler himself questioned his top staff, furious and paranoid. Cameras were added. Surveillance was tightened. Elisabeth remembered the fear, how even a simple mistake could lead to someone disappearing. No one ever mentioned the boy again. In 1943, something even more shocking happened. One night, the Berghof was unusually tense. Elisabeth and the other maids were ordered to stay away from a certain room. She caught a glimpse of a pale man escorted by guards into the estate. Staff whispered he was a Jewish doctor brought from a nearby camp to treat a high-ranking Nazi, possibly Himmler. The visit was secret. After that night, the doctor was never seen again. Elisabeth said this moment changed how she saw everything. The same people who preached hate were secretly using the skills of those they targeted. It made her question the entire system. Then there were the film nights. Hitler loved watching movies, and the Berghof had its own screening room. Elisabeth's job during those nights was to serve tea and snacks. But what she saw on the screen haunted her. The films were filled with cheerful music and images of smiling workers, even inside camps. They weren't real. They were propaganda meant to comfort and reassure Hitler and his guests. Elisabeth would walk away with a heavy heart. She had overheard enough to know these films weren't showing the truth, but they helped leaders believe everything was under control. Finally, there were the tunnels. Staff were never allowed near them, but Elisabeth once saw a sealed door in the basement. Guards sometimes spoke in hushed tones about escape routes and secret exits. Rumors spread that Hitler had a plan to flee, maybe to South America. Others thought the tunnels were for hiding stolen treasures. No one really knew. But the fear of defeat was growing, and even the most powerful people were making backup plans. Where is she now? Elisabeth Kalhammer passed away in 2022 at the age of 97, just months before her 100th birthday. She spent most of her life in quiet anonymity, choosing not to speak of her time working at Adolf Hitler's private estate, the Berghof, during World War II. But in her final years, she broke her silence. Not for fame, but to finally unburden the memories she had carried for decades. Her story offered rare insight into Hitler's private world, one shaped not only by power and fear, but by paranoia, secrets, and carefully crafted appearances. Elisabeth had witnessed strange disappearances, private film screenings, whispered rumors, and moments that didn't match the public image of the Nazi regime. By finally speaking up, Elisabeth didn't guess. She gave facts from her own life. She didn't try to rewrite history. She tried to fill in the missing pieces. Her memories, kept quiet for years, showed the private world of Hitler not as a powerful leader, but as a scared, angry, and unstable man. She also talked about Eva Braun, who many thought was just a bystander. But Elisabeth saw something else. Eva was involved. She listened, she watched, and she helped keep things running smoothly for Hitler. We hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for more amazing stories.